Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Lammers. I am the international member of the Taxpayer Advocacy panel. It's my morning, but potentially, if you're thinking of applying for this role, then you might be somewhere else in the world where it's the afternoon or the evening. So um, I'm aware that a number of people have said that they couldn't make it, so I'm just going ahead and I'm going to record this just so that you can watch this later on in your own time. But I won't keep you for too long. This is just kind of a summary of how what it's like being the international member of the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel and maybe to help kind of entice you into applying. So my term runs out this year, at the end of this year. Everybody who is on the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel serves a 3-year term, and then you finish, or as they say, that you term out. So my term ends at the end of this year, and I'm really keen to make sure that we have the best high quality candidate to fill the role coming up. So just a reminder that applications close on March 15th, which wait, is that that's next week on Friday. So you apply through the USA Jobs website. And just to clarify, this is not a paid role, this is a voluntary role, but it is still being managed through the USA Jobs website. And you essentially submit your resume and a covering letter and fill in other information. And then that then gets sent to the TAP staff, and they then review the applications. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about the application process here at the end. But if you haven't already, what I would really strongly recommend that you do is to read the blog post that I wrote about what it's like being the international member of the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel. It gives a good overview of exactly what is involved and what you're getting into. So hopefully that helps. But I'm going to kind of talk through some of the main points on this presentation and also just point out some additional things that might be useful for you as you're considering applying. So on a high level, what is the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel? So it's basically a federal advisory committee under the Department of Treasury. And in the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel, it is made up of volunteers, so taxpayer volunteers from all 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and one international member. And so that's the role that we're talking about here today. So TAP has been around for 20 years. It was established by law. And so it is a committee that is funded by the government. And also it is a part of a kind of advisory role where the IRS has made a commitment to listen to the ideas and suggestions from the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel members. So often what you'll find within TAP, or so Taxpayer Advocacy Panel, the acronym for it is TAP. So I'm going to say TAP because it's a lot easier to say. And basically, the work that is done within the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel overall is coming up with ideas and suggestions to improve customer service and communications between the IRS and the taxpayer public. And that is the focus, that is the remit of TAP. I think often we get a lot of suggestions from people who might have ideas and suggestions to change the laws. That does not fall in the remit of TAP. To change the laws, it has to be done through Congress to legislate and change the laws there. That is their role in the government. So unfortunately, changing the laws is not something that we can do here. However, that is something that often comes up in conversation between the members in TAP. So it's not to say there's no discussion about it, but it is definitely not something that we can do in TAP. So I just want to clarify that. And oh shoot, what was the other thing I wanted to say on this one? The other thing is, sorry, I lost it. I'm sure it'll come back to me later. But so the types of people that you'll find that you are working with are it's a combination of people across the country. So keep in mind that most of the people are stateside. You are very uniquely positioned in terms of being the only person living outside of the United States. Um, that's not to say that others within TAP, other members of TAP haven't had experience living overseas. I've definitely met some that lived abroad for a while, or even ones that, for example, have another passport and they're dreaming of moving abroad, so they want to pick your brain about what it's like. So that's a good way of building good relations and networking as well. So, but for the most part, most of the people do not have experience working in what are deemed as international taxpayer issues. And so this is the kind of wider role that you play in terms of not only educating and raising awareness of the issues that Americans abroad, green card holders, anybody who's not a US citizen but has some sort of US tax liability that you kind of fall under in terms of your role of who you represent on the panel, but also in terms of educating your fellow TAP members on the international issues that we face. So, uh, and so in order to join and become the international member of TAP, you must be a resident outside of the US. Um, that said, if you spend half of your year inside of the US and then half of your year outside of the US, I know a lot of people do that. That's okay. As long as you spend the majority of the year outside of the US, so like 6 months plus 1 day or something like that, you're fine. Another thing to keep in mind is that if, for example, you get a new work assignment or life circumstances change and you need to move back to the US, but you still want to be on tap. If there's potentially a vacancy for the tap role in the state that you move to, potentially you could then transfer. But it's all very circumstantial and if that's available, etc. So just very much depends on how things work out there. And then the other thing is that you must be up to date and compliant on your US tax filing obligation as well, and not have any outstanding tax either. So that's like a baseline requirement that they check. So before you apply, just to kind of give you a heads up in terms of the time commitment, on average, they say that there is anywhere between 3 to 5 hours a week of working on tap. Uh, Personally, I have found that that time commitment really ebbs and flows depending on the month and the year, the time of year. So, so far this year, we haven't had any meetings. We're just getting started next week. So this is like the second week of March. The tap year tends to go until November. So it kind of follows like the tax year in a way, where it's open from like the tax season normally it opens the end of January and then it closes in November. So it's roughly around the same time. It kind of depends on lots of different variables and factors in terms of when we get started, but it seems like as I've been here, we've started in March and then we finish in November. Um, and during that time, there's more hours put into committee meetings that we have, as well as working on issues and submitting them to the IRS. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's normally a trip to the US to have one in-person TAP meeting to meet with all the fellow members. Because of COVID, that didn't happen over COVID, but last year was the first time that the panel had met in person since COVID, which was in DC. This year, we're going to be meeting in Florida. And so they tend to try to pick a different location in the country, and it is paid for. So the flights and you get like a per diem for food and your hotel is covered and that for that trip. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of having a time commitment for attending the in-person meeting, which is just for 3 days. And the meetings themselves, There tends to be at least 2 meetings a month, but keep in mind that each of those meetings tends to be about an hour long, but there's a lot of preparation before and after those meetings in order to make sure that business runs smoothly. And in addition, as the international member, I really highly recommend that you also attend what's called the screening committee. So the screening committee is basically on the Improve IRS website, which is the TAP website where the public can submit suggestions and ideas for improvements. Um, Basically, the screening committee goes through all of those suggestions from the public, and we screen out the ones that are not relevant or not systemic. Really, ultimately, we're looking for systemic issues, so issues where multiple taxpayers are experiencing the same thing. If it is somebody who's personally struggling with a particular thing, like often we get people saying, oh, I haven't gotten my COVID payments or something like that, then that isn't systemic. That's more an individual one-to-one kind of thing, so that they get referred to the Taxpayer Advocate Service in order to get help to resolve that issue for on a one-to-one basis. So screening out the stuff and then looking for the good stuff of like ideas and suggestions of how to improve the IRS. And sometimes it requires additional investigation to see if that is a systemic issue. TAP members aren't always necessarily familiar with all of the issues that are being submitted, so sometimes there's investigation before it then gets created into an issue that the committee then starts to work on. And then finally, there's the joint committee meeting, which meets once a month typically. And essentially, it is all of the committee heads who meet to then vote on submitting the issues that each of the other individual committees have worked on. I think the next slide goes into here. I'll go on this slide here. So there are 6 TAP committees, and they each cover different areas. So notices and correspondence, they're the ones that work on the types of letters and also the language in the letters that go to taxpayers, submitting suggestions to improve those letters so that they really clearly communicate what the IRS is saying, as well as the action required from the taxpayer. Um, and the Taxpayer Assistance Center improvements. This actually isn't so relevant for international because there are no taxpayer assistance centers outside of the United States, so I've tended not to do very much there. Tax forms and publications is just as it says, working on improving the tax forms and the publications that go out to the public. Taxpayer communications is, as it says, communications with taxpayers, and toll-free phone lines, which is making suggestions and improvements to the phone line system, which is a core piece of communication with the taxpayers. And then I skipped over special projects, but special projects tend to be where the international member goes, because it tends to all of the international issues tend to fall into special projects, as well as like the other kinds of topics that tend to be covered under special projects include stuff like identity theft kind of stuff, anything else that doesn't fall into any of the other committees. So for example, last year there was a lot of hoo-ha-ha with the 1099 form, and they didn't know where to put that, so special projects got in and we worked on that to improve the new 1099 form. Stuff like that is where special projects goes. So just kind of going back here, the 3 core pieces of work that are being done as a member of TAP, you'll find are the committee work during the committee work sessions, which tend to be from March to November. Outreach, which is contacting international taxpayers and raising awareness of the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel's existence, and also networking. And I would say that that's networking not only in the international community, but also within TAP itself, the TAP staff, as well as the Taxpayer Advocate Service. So those are like the 3 main things that you would focus on and do. and each international member kind of takes their own, everybody brings their own flavor to the role. So I know that my predecessor, Laura Snyder, did a lot of the committee work, and really focused on submitting lots of different issues and really holding the IRS to account. Um, that's not to say that I haven't done that as well, but I've done a lot of work on outreach in terms of raising awareness that the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel exists, as well as networking, so I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. But this is just to give you a structure of each of the committees has this structure. So there's lots of roles within the committee, and you can actually wear one or multiple hats in this kind of matrix of different things. So like in the Special Projects Committee, I have been in the screening team. I've also been part of the what's called not the outreach, but the internal communications committee. So there's always one person, sorry, I left that off here. There's always one person from each of the committees that is a representative on what's called the internal communications committee, which is about communicating internally, as well as, for example, worked on like updating the TAP brochure, updating the TAP website, things like that. So all of these are different roles that are held by a combination of members of the committee, as well as the staff, the TAP staff that are paid in order to support the committee's work. So talking a little bit more about outreach, there are a lot of different ways to raise awareness about TAP. That includes attending in-person events, which I have done. Doing webinars like this one. My first year I did a webinar with the Taxpayer Advocate Service, and then I posted that as a video on YouTube because I didn't even know that the Taxpayer Advocate Service existed as a service for anybody. So it was really good to hear from them on that. Going to networking events, doing blog posts, and also posting in online forums, or also appearing on podcasts. I've done 2 podcasts, but like this is all off my own back. This is all in my spare time on top of my job. So you do as much as you can. You do as little or as much as you can. Some don't do any outreach, and some do a lot. So it just, again, it's up to you and how you want to go about fulfilling the role. And then the networking part, I think, is really super critical, especially for the international member. What I've done in my role, so for example, when we did the TAP meeting in person last year, which was a really big deal since it was the first TAP meeting in person since COVID, but I asked the TAP director if I could do a presentation specifically on international taxpayers, and they said yes. So I was like, okay, great. So I did a presentation for all of the TAP members at the beginning of the TAP year, and I got so much positive feedback from all of my fellow TAP members, and it actually made the work that I was doing in TAP a lot easier because I was able to share with them the difficulties that international taxpayers have with the IRS. I think, all Americans have a real difficulty with liaising with the IRS. It's a very difficult agency on a lot of different levels, but the bottom line is that like in my first year, I felt like I had to go to all the meetings because almost all of the different issues were touching on international issues. And in particular, joining the joint committee meeting, which is where all of the committee heads, committee chairs vote on the issues that go up to the IRS. That was the only time I had visibility on the other committees and the work that they were doing. And I was able to feed in to those issues and say, actually, you need to tweak this because this impacts internationals, or actually you didn't get that quite right, like you should change it to say this so that it is like worded better so that the IRS can understand it better, things like that. And I felt like I was just running all over the place because nobody else on TAP really kind of touches on almost all of the committees like the international member does. And especially with the amount of um we are international taxpayers are particularly disadvantaged. They're recognized as an underserved community by the IRS. So this is a particularly important role, um, not only within the government, but also for the American abroad community. So I felt like a real responsibility to make sure that I was trying to do everything. And in the end, what I found was when I did this presentation last year, it made me do less work than I had done in my first year, so I wasn't running around all the time. So networking with the other committee members is really essential so that it reduces the amount of work on your plate, is what I found. Um, is also helps a lot to get to know the TAS staff, especially at the in-person meeting, know what they do. It gives you a much better idea of how the IRS functions and the difficulties that they face within the organization. You also get an opportunity to attend, so I'm using a lot of acronyms here, but the most serious problems is the MSPs, where I think I have a copy of it here somewhere, but every year the Taxpayer Advocate Service puts out a report to Congress, and in that they also write 10 most serious problems. So it's the 10 most serious problems that are experienced by taxpayers, and almost always there is an international one because we continue to be disadvantaged and have a really difficult time with the IRS. And so attending those MSP sessions where you can give feedback to the attorney advisors who are drafting those documents that become official government reports is super important. SME meetings are subject matter expert meetings where, let's say, for example, you're wanting to work an issue on like improving the phone lines, but you don't really know how the phone lines work. So what you do is you invite a subject matter expert from the IRS who works on phone lines to come in and talk about the topic. And then you basically just kind of ask them questions about how things work. And then that helps you then form, helps the committee then form the issues and suggestions for improvements on phone lines. And then also recently we had a GAO meeting, so the Government Accountability Office, they were designated to write a particular report, and so we were able to sit in on a meeting with them and give them feedback on that particular issue that they were writing a report on. And also there's other special feedback sessions so that they just kind of come up on an ad hoc basis, and this is all online. It's all done on Microsoft Teams. So it's all totally doable. Do keep in mind that most of these meetings happen during Eastern time hours. So potentially it might eat into your depending on where you are in the world. I would imagine it'd be very difficult for somebody in Asia Pacific time, which is kind of opposite work hours. But maybe you might be a night owl, so you might be okay with that. For me, I'm based in London, so I tend to have meetings either in the morning or in the afternoon or in the evenings. So I just make sure that I manage my schedule appropriately there, outside of my work hours. Um, and then finally, having an opportunity to speak to the attorney advisors when they're writing the Taxpayer Advocate Service most serious problems reports to Congress. So those are really essential to get your voice heard on those. My first year, I spoke to the attorney advisor after she had written it, which was a real shame. And so there was a real effort to make sure that I spoke to the attorney advisors before they wrote the one they did this year. And then it was really pretty satisfying and I think a really big achievement to see a number of the suggestions that I had recommended to them actually made it into the report. And that's a really key advocacy tool in order to make sure that things can actually change with the IRS. So another thing to keep in mind is that even if you don't if you're not offered the international role, there's always an alternate member. So they always get somebody to be an alternate as a backup, and then you just kind of sit in reserve. You don't actually do any work, you don't attend any meetings, but you're just notified, and you could become the international member if the member resigns for whatever reason. You know, we're all volunteers. People's lives change. I've seen TAP members resign because they got a new job. I've seen them resign because their parents are really sick and they have caring duties. I've seen, and then even some people have passed away, and so obviously they need somebody to replace them, and so they always have an alternate. So you may not get the actual member role, but you might be offered alternate, in which case you might be called upon when the time comes. So the overall application process, so applications are open now. They close on March 15th. I have a feeling they might extend it, but I don't know. They have historically extended the deadline, but we'll see. Um, I would just recommend just getting it in by March 15th. That's the best way to make sure it's in. You'll then be, if you make it to the next round, you'll then be offered a phone interview, which would probably be around June, July, although they've started early a little bit this year, so it might be even in May. After that, if you make it through that, you'd be invited to do fingerprints for the FBI background check. Yes, I know this sounds really serious, but I just have to say that that was one of the trickiest things that I had to do, and I actually ended up doing it when I was on a trip visiting my mom back in Ohio. So it is extremely difficult to figure out how to do outside of the US, I have to say, but they'll work with you if you're not going back to the States or what have you on figuring out how to get that done if it comes to that. And then finally, they would offer you the role sometime by the end of the year. So that's kind of the timeline of how things work. I think I forgot one other thing, which is that the other TAP members come from a wide variety of backgrounds. You do tend to find a lot of people who uh, are current either accountants, enrolled agents, CPAs, tax lawyers, even. And but also there are some people who are former they're retired IRS staff who then join the taxpayer advocacy panel in retirement because they know so much and they want to work and help the taxpayers. Um, I would say that I'm an anomaly in a way. I don't have a tax background at all. I'm just a taxpayer that got burned, and I just don't want to see other people get burned by the system either. So that's why I got involved. Although there are others that are similar to me in terms of they're just an everyday taxpayer, which is really what the taxpayer advocacy panel is. It's the taxpayer perspective on improving the IRS. So that's what they're really looking for. But anyway, I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna stop the recording. So yeah, thank you. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out and I will answer by email. So thank you.